Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Scott Stedman podcast. I hope you are having a wonderful, wonderful week. And today we're going to be discussing a thing that has happened a few weeks ago. But for us, it's only been 3 days as the time of recording this, which is that there has been a trademark for worship leader, and that has been causing a big storm, as social media storm, as there was somebody's account that had been blocked because of copyright infringement because of the term worship leader. So joining me today is a worship leader himself, Micah Current. Micah, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I probably need to take worship leader off of my social stuff.
Well, we did have that conversation about the term leader and pastor and why we that was like a last year podcast. So maybe you just got to change leader to pastor and then you'll be fine, right? Unless someone trademarked pastor. So
I better hurry and do that before I get a lawsuit.
yeah, then you can start. Then anybody who uses the title pastor, like on their webpage of all these churches, be like copyright infringe, copyright infringe, copyright infringe. Oh my gosh! But before we dive into this topic, stories gone wild. Micah, what do you have for us today?
In the spirit of the topic of worship, I didn't have one ready, but I just thought of one. So, years ago, I was leading worship at the church I was on staff at, and we were singing. Um, we did the worship set, and usually how we did it was, we did like the welcome, went right into worship to two songs, announcements and prayer, two songs, prayer, message, response. And so we did the first part of worship. We did the announcements. We got into the second worship block. And I think I did like maybe how great is our God and how great thou art or something like that. And the church
Okay,
just
yeah.
loved that and responded well to that. Right before we got to the second chorus of how great is our God, my guitar string broke. And I kind of just backed off. And because we had a smaller team at the time, like I just said, just our voices. And the panic in my team's faces when they're like, why aren't we playing this exactly how we're supposed to? It's because I was just kind of like, waving my hands behind me, and I'm like, let's just sing that chorus again with our voices, and let's go into how great thou art. Um, and I remember one of the people came up to me, one of the team members came up to me after the service and like, why did you stop? And like they got really upset that I stopped. I think it was because we were getting caught up in the moment of worship and getting caught up in the song itself and the emotional outpouring of the spirit and things like that. And they couldn't understand why I stopped. And I looked at them. I was like, "Look, my guitar string broke." And they're like, "Oh no, it's terrible." So, it's not necessarily a story's gone wild, but it's just a reminder to be cognizant of everything that's going on. So, like, thankfully, I was on staff at this church. I have my own office. I had an extra guitar in my office, and I was able to go while the message was going on, tune that guitar up, bring it in for the response, and the rest of the service is fine. But yeah, several times, where I've broken drumsticks over the years, or broken guitar strings, or um, battery doesn't work in a guitar, or something crazy happens.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought since we're covering kind of the worship, conversation today, or the topic is worship today, I kind of wanted to share a worship story that's gone wild. Do you have any stories from camp ministry, or like like as far as like maybe on the creative side or the worship side where things have gone just completely awry, and in the moment you
So
just know what to do?
yeah, and that's the thing about worship at camp, because I have probably a gazillion stories about worship at camp, and it's kind of hard to pick one. Um, but you kind of talked about the idea of the serenity and why'd you stop playing? And I mean, for you, it was a broken string. But yet we we're still able to see the spirit move. So kind of in vain of that, there was a time where we had a camp team from Anderson come, and one of my good buddies was actually part of that praise and worship team, Mike Snyder. And they came and they were there to help us with camp, and they were playing music. And at camp, we have, and now Camp Marengo had an outdoor chapel. that was covered. So it's very common that it could be raining, and yet we would be outside in the rain under this like pavilion and having worship. And so they're doing that. We're having worship and stuff, and all of a sudden, the somehow a fuse got blown. We don't know how it happened, but a fuse got blown, and now we're trying to figure out, okay, where is this fuse or this breaker to turn the power on? And the thing is we thought the obvious thing would be like, oh, in the back of the chapel. We open it up, no, that's on. So it's like, okay, well, let's go here. And the thing is to get power to the chapel, there was another main breaker that was somewhere on the other side of camp. Like, I don't know how they wired this thing, but it was weird. And the only person who knew the chart would have been the caretaker, who apparently went to the store. So he wasn't even on site. So there's a bunch of us staff members trying to figure out where it is. I'm kind of doing stuff that's more towards the stage. So, power goes out, instruments are dead, but since a couple of them had acoustic guitars, they're just playing, and people are still having worship, and they're singing. And they started singing Awesome God by Rich Mullins. And all I can know is they're singing, towards the end, our God is an awesome God. And then after they finished, because it was raining the day before, and we still had storm clouds passing through, you just heard this loud boom of thunder. And I'm like sitting there like, holy cow. And the kids have just lost it. They're like, woo. So then they start singing it again. So they start singing Awesome God again. And when they get to the ending of that song again, it struck thunder a second time. And everybody cheered. And then around that time, Dave must have got back, the caretaker, and found the switch and turned it on. And the power went back on right before the pastor spoke. And I thought the coincidences that it would happen one time, but that it happened a second time, was just mind boggling. And I was just like, it's one of my most memorable things of worship. And I wasn't even up there on stage. I was kind of just, trying to get the power back on.
Should do a podcast on camp stories, but more specifically like the storm, like thunderstorms and crazy storms during camps.
Oh my gosh, I have a lot of those too.
One that really comes to mind is that I 2012, 2013 was counseling. I was doing an internship at a church. I was working full time at a music store, and I made the decision to lead worship and be a counselor that week at camp. And this was camp 3-5, third grade through fifth grade, which why in the world I did that, I'll never know. But in the middle of the night, we had like our debrief meeting at the end of the night before we put kids, in their cabins for, lights out or whatever you want to call it. And Andy, our camp director, was like, there's a chance of a really bad storm tonight. If that's the case, we'll all meet here and like kind of the central location of camp, and probably the most safest of buildings on camp, where we can, kind of hunker down if a storm gets really bad. And so I remember going to bed. Those kids, they won't stop talking. It's 12:30, 1:32 in the morning, and then 3:30 in the morning, sure enough, tornado sirens are going off. And we got to get all of our kids, and we got to get them all to Founders Hall safely. We have to wake everybody up and make sure everybody's out of the cabins, back into the main building. And by the way, I had to get up and go to work that next morning. So that was a long day. So yes, plenty of storms during camp, and like you're out in the middle of nowhere, right? There's no, cell phones little to non-existent, and you're relying on one crappy router for Wi-Fi, and only certain people should have the Wi-Fi password, and it's hard to really depict what's going on outside of where you are. So yeah, I remember. Were you referring to Camp Marengo in that story with the electric?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Were you referring to Camp Marengo with the electric?
Yeah, I was working at Camp Marengo. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that story was correlated with Camp Marengo, right?
Yes.
So I can remember that I remember that chapel, the power going out in that chapel all the time. That was a continuous thing. It wasn't just
It
like the one
was.
story that you were referring to. Like it was an ongoing issue.
Yeah, there
Because
was
that
a lot
happened
of
when I was a
issues.
camper there.
Yeah, it was wild. But as we've been talking about worship, just like I said, the time of recording just 3 days ago, which this would have been March 17th, um, there's this news broke that there was um, a I guess we would call him a social media account or worship influencer that goes by the title Rogue Worship Leader, which usually kind of creates like worship means to Star Wars. And I've seen some of his stuff too. It's pretty funny, but eventually his Facebook page got disabled because they said that that was shut down for a trademark infringement. And they happened to look and see that that worship leader um, was in the title, and because of that, it got taken down. Which the person who runs the account basically said, how is that possible? It's crazy how that's possible because worship leader is a common term. It's a job title. How can that be trademarked? And it's a term that's used by thousands of churches. And like you said, like on your resume, Mike, before we recorded, like, oh, I might have to change my title from worship leader to something else. So actually on his on his Instagram page, he says, please follow my backup account, which his main account is Rogue Worship Leader, and his backup account is Rogue Leader of Worship to help fight off the copyright infringement, I guess. But yeah, and he kind of talks a little bit about how his Facebook account got shut down. And they say that, it was flagged with Authentic Media LLC, who had trademarked the term worship leader. They also went and looked this article. This is from churchleaders.com. Now I'm pulling this up. They even looked at kind of the worship leader, and they said that all the way back like in 2016, Authentic Media filed the trademark for worship leader. But I think even all the way back I read an article like even back in 1996, it was trademarked when they first started trademarking the term worship leader, especially within their magazine or their brand, which they're, again, Authentic Media LLC has a thing called Worship Leader Magazine. Interestingly enough, I think it was Saturday, Micah, where I sent you a Instagram post from somebody from Worship Leader Mag defending their position on trademarking worship leader. And it was this whole article. And I went to go to Worship Leader Magazine just to see if it was posted. And literally you search for Worship Leader trademark, and it even says up here that a letter from Stephanie Fromm on the trademark discussion, and that's the person who posted something on the Worship Leader Instagram page. So this worshipleader.com, here's a letter that's like defending the trademark discussion. I click on the link and it tells me the page you're looking for does not exist. Well, that's weird. I go to the Instagram post I sent you. That post has been taken down. So, and again, my big thing about transparency. So already I'm kind of like, okay, what's going on? Or probably got a lot of blowback from this stance on trademarking worship leaders. So so that's just me kind of painting broad strokes about this article. Michael, what were your thoughts when I shared this post with you that the term worship leader has been copyrighted and they have taken down at least one person's flagged at least one person's account because they had the title worship leader in it?
Well, I could just say it's crazy and we could just hang up the call. But yeah, I people have lost their minds. I mean, like seriously, like you and I think before we even hit record, you're like, well, what about if somebody did the same thing for the title pastor? You know how many pastors there are in the world? You know how many worship leaders there are in the world? Like you could do it with every other topic too. Uh, children's pastor, youth pastor, executive pastor, teaching pastor, lead pastor. If they imagine if somebody was like, you know what, we're going to just do copyright infringements for all these titles, and so like, what? Nobody else can have the title pastor anymore. It just sounds ridiculous. Um, I know for a while, like when I was, getting my feet wet in ministry and was, still leading worship on a regular basis, like, uh, while I was pursuing ordination, a lot of my friends, would still say, "Hey, this guy's a worship leader," or the church you were serving at would say, "Hey, this is our worship leader."
Hmm.
And then when I got my ordination, it was like, "Oh, he's a pastor now, so he's a worship pastor, creative arts pastor." So, but also it kind of just depends on what church, um, what the church calls it, right? And
Yeah.
so, Scott, you did a search recently. I mean, you've been at your church, I don't know how long, like a year, almost a year, over a year. How long has it
It's
been
been
since you've
less
been
than a
in?
year. I started in the fall of last year, so.
So what I mean was the search of finding your current position. So, you know, when you were looking, Scott, what
Hmm.
you probably saw all kinds of titles, right? For
Yeah.
for ministry positions. So you probably see director of family ministries. You probably saw family life pastor. You probably saw children's pastor and children's director. Like there's so many different titles. I just want to know why they went after worship and like kind of what was the meaning behind that.
Yeah, I'm
And
not
like
sure.
and to take it a step further, like you sent me that article and I went to click on it and it didn't work, so it was taken down. And I checked again today and it's gone. So um is it legit? Do you think it's legit?
I mean, here's the thing. And like that's the thing. Like they've only went after one account, but looking at the guy's post, like he has all the documentation and he put all the screenshots saying, yeah, it's been taken down because of the copyright worship leader. Which again, you could go to any like you could just look up like I mean, again, when you have a copyright, that's public domain. You can look up who owns the copyright and everything. So when you start making attachments and you start tying it in, then yeah, it's kind of there. And so it's one of those things where I'm just boggled by it. And it even bothers me that the fact that I mean, if it was fake, if it was something that's kind of being blown out of proportion, I would I would venture that um I would venture that something would have happened um where it's like, oh, this is a misunderstanding, or the owner of the trademark would have reached out to Rogue Worship Leaders site saying, hey, we're sorry, we just renewed our trademark for our magazine. We didn't know that your page was going to get tagged like through the automated things, and then it was going to cause those issues. Like anything like that, I would have been like, okay, it's an accident, you know, we'll let bygones be bygones. But the fact that they didn't and they keep defending it and they're saying, well, no, that's not true. And then when someone says something, they take down the post and now there's no existence of it. And even just going to worship leader Instagram page, there actually is um, somebody who's actually talking about it. There's a video that's still posted. And just even looking at the text, because I haven't watched the video yet, it says, can I still use worship leader on my website, my Facebook group, job title, Instagram, etc.? Yes, you can. The narrative that we're going after all accounts using worship leader is a lie and manipulative tactic to divide the worship community. Looking forward to Monday.
Hmm.
Now, I have an issue with the phrasing in that text. And again, I have to watch the video, so I don't want to make too much of an assumption. But the fact that you're saying that, oh, this is all lie and manipulation to destroy the worship community, I think that's a little too far. I feel like that's almost gaslighting, because how can you say, well, we're not doing it, it's all lie, it's all fabrication, when you have somebody who's posting evidence and proof that their account had been taken down and that you hold the copyright to worship leader?
Hmm. I don't know, man. It sounds pretty suspicious to me.
It does sound suspicious. And that's why I'm kind of, and that's the thing. If it was, and that's why I would say, if you're taking down a post where you're addressing it and you take it down, that's suspicious. If you say, yeah, hey, it was an accident, it's Facebook's automated AI system that flagged it and it took it down, but we've kind of said, nope, don't worry about it. That's not, whatever the case may be, or whatever happened, or if someone on the legal side of Worship Leader Mag decided, hey, we're going to start flagging things, and you just happen to flag one that has a big following and they're making a big stink about it. It's like, ooh, this is a bad idea, we need to recant. Like, do that, be transparent. But the fact that we're having a he said, she said debate, that posts are being taken down when they are addressing it, and then they're removing it themselves, it doesn't sit right with me. And that's why I always say transparency is the best policy, because at least if you get all the information out there, you can't do what I'm doing, where now I'm kind of speculating. I'm going, okay, this seems odd, this seems suspicious. Because when I start having those feelings, then I'm going to start asking more questions. And if you can answer those questions and have everything out and are open for answer any questions that I have or Rogue Worship Leader has about, hey, why did my account get flagged? And go, oh, we're sorry, sir. Here's the reason why. Here's all this, and have that open dialogue, then that becomes a different story.
Mm-hmm. It's I just go back to the thing, to the point where it's like, how many worship leaders are there in this world?
Yeah.
And how many worship pastors are there in this world, or pastors or leaders or churches, whatever, and people that serve in those roles, whatever their title is? That
Well,
just seems like an unstoppable, impossible battle to win if you were to like legally go after everybody that had that.
and I think that's also the issue with copyright.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can understand, like let's say, well, it's for an example, like when we talked about Jordan in the podcast that I occasionally make an appearance on. Now I'm not a regular anymore of Nerd Talk. Like, Jordan wanted to do a podcast with Nerd Talk, but then he decided to do a Nerd Talk with Jordan Halstead because he saw that there was already a Nerd Talk podcast, even though it seemed like that they weren't posting regularly. There wasn't a lot of stuff. He thought, well, I don't want to get into it. Plus, if there was a copyright on Nerd Talk and he started using a Nerd Talk, then yeah, there would be some things, because, and it always goes back to money. Like, can you make money off a trademark? So I can understand, like, people making money off like a worship account and using the term worship leader. I get that. But a worship leader makes money. So it goes back to how far is too far, where if I have the title of worship leader and I'm leading worship, next thing you know, I get hit with a legal document saying that I need to change my title because I'm infringing on someone's copyright, or I'm of a title of worship leader, because I'm making money off my title worship leader. And it's like, I can understand, like, if you're an ordained minister and then you become a worship pastor because you are a pastor, but those who lead worship who are not ordained, what title are they going to have? Leader of worship, or worship guy, worship gal, like, or guitar playing man that praise leader? Like, what? We're getting too ridiculous with these trademarks, and it's weird when something as common as worship leader is now being an issue. And I don't see this continuing to be an issue. I think that hopefully things will get settled, especially since there has been a major backlash towards not only Worship Leader Mag, but also the holding company, Authentic Media LLC. And if that's the case, then hopefully this will be end and more information will come out and whole thing will be put to rest. But I mean, but again, like I'm still suspicious because of just the way Authentic Media and Worship Leader Mag has handled this debacle has not been very smooth, in my opinion.
Yeah. And, I played in a band back in high school and in college. And, we were always like, we were signed to a small record label when I was younger. And it was, all about promotion and all about what you could draw and all about what you could, like you're saying, Scott, how can you, make money on this and copyright infringements and everything else. And like, so we got super paranoid once we signed to a label. Are you, do we need to copyright all of our music? Do we need to copyright all of our songs? Do we need to copyright, who wrote what and how and the date and everything else? And so like, just protecting ourselves more than anything. But like, I can't imagine the legal mess today in today's society where everything is like on the internet. Everything's on streaming, everything's on, Spotify or YouTube or TikTok. And it's like, it gets really messy. Like, we've talked several times about, worship and different genres of mega churches like Bethel or Elevation or Jesus Culture. Like, if you go on Song Select and look at any of Elevation's tunes, Stephen Furtick's name's on it because he helped write it. So like he gets a cut of that every time Song Select gives them, I don't know what the percentage is. And I'm assuming it's probably way worse than like Spotify, because Spotify, that's part of the backlash of artists who put their music on Spotify because they get nothing when it comes to streaming versus like 20 years ago when you talk about physical record sales, right? Versus, cassettes, CDs, vinyls, 8 tracks, whatever it is. They would get a pretty significant cut. Now with streaming, everybody wants a cut. So the title, back to the conversation about worship leader, worship pastor, I don't really follow, like, taking it back to the social media conversation for a second. Like, I don't really follow the whole, Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or anything like that. But like, there's like this whole conversation about charging people if they make money off of social media because Facebook wants their cut, TikTok wants their cut, Twitter wants their cut. And it's like, well, when did social media become this, pay to play kind of thing? It's about promoting yourself and getting things out there. And to take it a step further, Elon Musk bought Twitter for $43 billion. I think he's got some money. I think he's going to be okay. Same thing with Zuckerberg. Same thing with the guys that thought about Google and created Google. It's just crazy, this whole conversation of copyright. And you could get into the whole conversation about First Amendment and freedom of speech and all that stuff. And like, putting stuff on your social and what's real and what's not, and what's clickbait and what's not, and what's appropriate and what's not. And so like, I just think it's ridiculous. Personally, I think it's ridiculous that, people can't put who they are on their social without fear of getting, either reprimanded or whatever this person said happened to them, where they were blocked or they were censored or it's just gotten
getting
to
a
the
cease
point.
and desist letter,
Yes, that too.
Things.
I've never got one of those, but
I have.
the
Not
but the
really, but yeah.
no, but seriously though, it's just crazy that we can't. I feel like we shouldn't have to look over our shoulder,
Yeah.
especially in the ministry and especially in church.
Yeah, because I think a lot of pastors or worship leaders are probably looking, depending on the culture of their church, they're probably already looking over their shoulders already. You don't need to worry about, businesses and the government and all these and all these like legal things. Like every time when I set it, I mean, that's the thing. How far we're going to go? If I set a title for my sermon and find out that, oh, I
Get a
said it
lawsuit Monday
this, and then
morning.
realize that some pastor down in like Arizona had the same title for a sermon and he actually copyrighted the title of that sermon. So no one could ever use that title. So anytime when, and especially if you're streaming stuff, and I go on a stream and I have my title, like, I don't know, like I know I'm going to be preaching at the end of April and I'm going to be speaking on the Jesus's walk with the two disciples on the Emmaus Road. Like if I call it the title "Walk in the Way of Jesus," that's copyrighted. Sorry, we're going to take down your videos of your sermon because you use this title that has been copyrighted by another pastor in Arizona, so you can't use that title. Like, when is the insanity going to end? How far are we going to push this? I mean, I know this is like one of those things where it's like ridiculous, but I'm sure there's probably some company is going to be like, oh, well, we can really milk this and make some money by trademarking sermon titles, since most pastors now are streaming everywhere because of the last couple of years where we had to go online, and now those who still continue to online and put their messages out there, how much infringement are we going to see there? I don't know. It's crazy. But friends, what's your take on this? Are you kind of like perplexed as Micah and I about this whole worship leader trademark thing? Hopefully, since this is, at the time of recording this is still a fresh story. Hopefully, by the time you listen to this, hopefully more information will be brought out and we kind of have all the facts about what went down and what happened. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for listening. We hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll be back on with another episode next week. Take care.